Hello and welcome, everyone. Today we are diving into the question, is your data safe in the hands of AI? Today's session will explore how to maintain control and transparency over your data while also addressing the privacy concerns facing global organizations and industries bound by strict regulations. My name is Carolyn Kushwa, and I'm a marketing content specialist here at Cofense. I'm super excited to be joined by Jason Muir, Cofense Senior Technical Product Manager, and James Hickey, Principal Sales Engineer at Cofense. Before we get started, I wanted to give a quick note on logistics. This session is being recorded and will be available on demand on our website over the coming days. We encourage you to submit your questions throughout the discussion using the Q&A window in your console. If there are any questions we don't have time to address today, we'll follow up via email after the webinar. So let's jump right in. To start, I would like to ask you guys, when an employee reports a suspicious email to an AI-powered security tool, what are the most significant hidden data security and privacy risks that organizations should be aware of, especially concerning where that data is sent and how it is used? Guys, I'm gonna take it away.
Do you want to start us off, Jason, or?
Yeah, sure. Let's talk about email just in general, right? Emails can contain a lot of sensitive information. Depending on what organization is sending it or what individual is sending it, you could have things like personal health information or personally identifiable information. You could have a number of really important internal business documents or even passwords inside of emails. That happens too. So you have to consider all aspects of what an email can contain, and that can be a wild array of things. That's really, all of those things can contain stuff that if it was leaked or included in some sort of training model could potentially cause the business some sort of harm or an individual themselves. So
Yeah, no, I think one of the key things to think about is this idea of sort of unauthorized data sharing, right? Which is something that I think is something that most organizations do have to kind of take into account. So if an employee is reporting a suspicious email, then the tool itself may end up sending the content, the attachments, the things that Jason has just kind of referred to. Potentially to third party. There might be third parties involved in that analysis. The model training associated with the AI, right? The data could end up, within that model, which is a key concern. And then, potentially if that then ends up in some kind of shared, threat intelligence on the back end of that process, right? The question then is, well, who is it being shared with? Like, where is it going, right? And so, as Jason said, if there's elements within the email that gets reported, which could contain some kind of, personal data, under normal circumstances, if you report an email, it goes to the abuse mailbox in your organization, right? And then your SOC team is dealing with that. And so that email stays within the context of your company. If it's being sent out to a third party, there are other, considerations that you then have to start to take into consideration. And then that's when the waters start to get, muddied, right? So essentially any kind of unauthorized sharing can lead to, non-compliance or, data breach, misuse of sensitive information. There's a whole list of things. And again, Jason referred to personal data or personal health information, right? Did that just happen to be in the email that got reported? Then that is something that potentially could trigger one of those kinds of breaches, right? It's a breach not of your organization but of the regulations, right? So some of it does depend on the regulations that the organization is being subjected to, and that can obviously be affected by the geographical location of where you're based and where your company does business, right? The whole kind of cross-border transfer restrictions, is something that affects this or has an effect on this as an overall topic. So it can be, it can be a bit of a minefield, essentially. And that's, part of the reason, that we've been hearing from customers is that, when obviously they're looking at AI, they're looking at automation, but this is a concern. And for us, the answer to the question tends to be quite straightforward. And, we'll probably get into that a bit later on, in this webinar. But, I say the actual issue itself can be a bit of a rat's nest, essentially.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you both. My next question I have here is, can you please discuss the chain of custody for a reported email? From the moment a user hits report, where does that data travel? Who has access to it? And what are the critical points where an organization can lose control or visibility when using a third-party AI solution?
I'll start with that because I mean we already deal with that on the PDR side of things. So when a user hits the report button, it's not always a report button. Sometimes people just forward it to their IT abuse mailbox. That email is going to go straight to the Security Operations Center. Typically, it'll be reviewed by an analyst. How they review that though is completely variable. Like every vendor out there is going to have a slightly different solution for the way to review that. Within Cofense, we leverage the triage product, which will pull the email in and do a rapid analysis of the entire email itself, as well as use a local AI solution on it. Now, when that email hits that SOC inbox, it gets sucked up into the email security tool. Depending on what security tool you're using or what their backend may look like, that email may be shoved off to another server somewhere in the cloud, and that cloud may exist somewhere in another part of the world. You don't know that for sure. It may also be going to a third-party vendor. There's a lot of like vendors out there who are leveraging third-party AI tooling, LLMs out there, because they are so robust, and those companies do a really good job of building LLMs. They leverage that, but because they're leveraging that, there's also a pipeline directly into that company. So you would need to check, your agreements with the company and see third-party processors and things like that to understand exactly where your data is going from there. And depending on like James said, there may be a component of this too that does automated threat data extraction, right? It could pull out certain strings and then share those with a community of threat researchers or with that security operations center. And like you said, you don't really know where that data might be going. If it's being shared, whoops, it went out there, you could cause irreparable damage to the business by sending that out. That's always a possibility. So you really do need to understand that email, once it's sent in and then it hits the vendor, it could go anywhere. I don't want to create, fear and fear about everything, but some vendors do leverage those third-party tools and do send things cross-border. And so you need to understand that because you could potentially be breaking your compliance regulations. Not knowing fully where everything goes is a problem for most people, especially when it comes to AI. And then also the AI itself, right? I mean, AI is still an evolving technology, and we don't fully grasp how exactly to get things to work exactly right. And especially with the generative AI, what is it going to do? What if there was a prompt injection in there and then all of a sudden it does something else? That's also a possibility. And we've actually seen that happen recently where an LLM was used to read an email message and there was a hidden prompt in there and it actually caused it to do something else. So there's that aspect of it too. It's not just about where the data is going, but what it's touching, because it could actually cause things to happen. So AI is great. It's going to help everybody if we use it precisely, if we use it in a way that gives us the highest confidence on those matches, specifically because we're working in security. We have to have high confidence matches. We can't have those low confidence ones that just remove emails, which would be breaking GDPR compliance, right? I think James can probably talk about it better than I can, but Title 22, where if we're automating the processing of emails, we need to have a good reason and an explainable reason for actually doing that processing. And that's also part of the chain of custody. Like, we need to know why something was processed. You can't really always get that out of the third-party vendor, but you can definitely get that from your internal SOC analysts. They build that enterprise knowledge, that context awareness for the actual business, and they are able to identify all that much better. So,
yeah, no, I mean, there's probably a couple of areas really just to add to that, specifically in terms of things you kind of have to think about. So one is transparency in data processing, right? So, are people informed about where the reported email data is actually being sent, right? So will it exist on, cloud servers? Will it end up in external threat intelligence networks? How is it processed, right? Is it automatically profiled? is it shared with other entities, right? So things like GDPR do require transparency and a lawful basis, like in quotes, lawful basis for processing. HIPAA, right, demands clear controls over, personal health information. So a lot of that is obviously, it's deep in the regulations, but again, those are things that you do need to think about. And the other sort of side of it as well is sort of, is the transmission of the data, or the storage of that data also secure, right? If you transmit the data over unencrypted channels, or it's stored poorly in, unsecured environments, misconfigured cloud databases, whatever, it could be intercepted. It could be accessed by unauthorized parties. And again, that's particularly risky for the types of data that we just talked about, or personal data, under the GDPR umbrella, right? So if at any point, there was a breach of that type of data in some capacity, then, you are exposing sensitive information, and that could lead to legal liability for the organization, reputational damage, essentially all the kind of things that you might actually experience had you been the victim of a cybersecurity breach. It's just, in this case, it's a breach that, you breached some sort of regulation, but you're going to sort of suffer similar types of after effects of doing that. So it's not something to be taken lightly. It is a complicated subject, and it is something definitely that people, do need to take into consideration. Right? You hit a button to report something. It sounds simple, but there are things to consider in terms of where that data ends up. And again, I think, from our perspective, we'd like to be as transparent as we possibly can about, what data, is transmitted, how and where it's stored, and what we do with that data, right? And I think we can be very transparent in each case about those things. So, we always encourage people to kind of ask those kind of questions, and often they do. And, as I say, we can talk about it, quite easily. But I think for some vendors, certainly that are running, AI systems, that contain black box processing, all that sort of stuff that's going on from an AI perspective, it can get a bit trickier. So I think the advice would be, in all cases, you've got to ask, you've got to find out where the stuff is going and get comfortable, with the path and the transmission and the storage and everything else.
And let me add this too, because it just sort of popped into my head. It's not just the chain of custody, it's also the processing pipeline that they use. It would be helpful for anyone who's getting an AI system to understand, do they actually do a pre-processing on the email before they send it off to an AI system? Are they removing the PII? Are they removing the PHI? Are they removing things that shouldn't be in there or are business sensitive? Having an awareness of exactly how they're processing it first will help you understand exactly, not only who's touching it, but where it's going and what it looks like in the end. If they're removing those things, that's great, because then they're training and they're not including your sensitive information, but you need to ask those questions. Absolutely need to know, how are they pre-processing the emails? Are they removing the sensitive information before they use it for training or to send off to a third party? Those would be critical points to understand.
Yeah, and I will just add as well, from our perspective, our report a button solution, we offer different versions of the button, but there is a version of the button that you can have, which would ensure that any data that is reported from an end user stays entirely within your corporate network, right? We have an option which allows you to report where no data is going anywhere other than to, your internal system or to our solutions which live inside your corporate network. So again, like I say, we can be pretty clear about, where the data goes, and offer, fully supported options for our reporter solution that ensures that data doesn't go somewhere where you're losing control of it.
Right.
That's great. You guys spoke a little bit during that about some of the regulations. I wanted to kind of follow up on that with our next question, which is, for global organizations operating under strict data privacy regulations such as GDPR or HIPAA, what are the main compliance challenges that they might encounter when deploying AI-driven email security solution, and how can these be addressed effectively? I apologize.
Yeah, I'll start us off on that. So I mean, Jason actually referred to this, earlier on, which is there is in certain regulations this concept of transparency and explainability. So GDPR, for instance, mandates transparency in automated decision making, right, under something called Article 22. So that specifically requires organizations to explain how an AI system would process the data or make decisions. So for instance, if it's flagging an email as malicious, then it does actually require that, there is some explanation of how that happens. But obviously a lot of AI models, and particularly the ones of the deep learning systems, can be black boxes, right? Yeah, and it's very difficult in those scenarios to actually monitor the decision-making process of the AI. You can monitor the data that goes into the model, and you can monitor the decision that comes out of the model. It's actually very, very difficult to, or in some cases impossible, to monitor the process, the exact moment in time in which the model makes a specific decision, which is quite a profound thing to learn about AI. But that specifically does make it difficult to provide clear explanations, right? And if the regulation is, well, you need to be very transparent and you need to provide explainability, then that potentially could lead you to non-compliance, right? And so in which case you're just kind of going to erode your end user trust and all those other kinds of things. So I think that is actually quite an interesting aspect of AI, the ability, for somebody to actually explain to you how the decision is made, right? If the data is being processed in that way and it's coming out with an automated decision, then, well, how did it do that, right? And I think somebody has to be able to kind of explain that to you as a customer, right? In terms of just in the spirit of transparency, but also in allowing you to be compliant with the regulations that specifically target that as an issue.
Yeah, so piggybacking on that, he's talking about one specific issue, but we can talk about more of the issues that they have. They're going to be facing a number of hurdles, right? Anybody who's highly regulated already has hurdles, but these are going to be even compounded with AI systems because of the sprawling nature of the technology and the way that third parties can be involved. So some of the main things they're going to be concerned about are things that I already talked about. It's going to be like the redaction of anything that is considered to be private information or health information. You need to know, is that actually even happening? And within your org specifically, how accurate is their redaction of that stuff? If it's going into training another model, do you know if it's going into train a model, or is it just being used for classification tasks? Are you not actually training a model? Those are things you need to know too, because if your data gets into that model, that stays persistent and it can be potentially reversed out if someone gets a hold of the model itself, which would lead to data leakage. And then there's just a number of other regulations that are going to come up into play. It's difficult. It's difficult for highly regulated environments to actually incorporate that AI when it involves external businesses. If it's entirely local or inside of the organization, there probably is a way to be able to do that and do it more effectively without having to deal with all of these regulations. And that's one of the ways that we've sort of approached the AI system, at least within Triage, was we built it locally into the Triage application so that data never left and that your model was explainable and it was right on your system, and it never, we don't use it for training at all. So it's very easy for us to explain how our AI works and exactly, where your data goes, whereas some other companies may have a little harder time to explain that. So.
Yeah, and there is other kind of, specific examples you can point to which, might present a challenge with these types, AI or fully automated type solutions, which, boils down to things like data minimization. So again, there's sort of regulations which say, yes, you can store certain amounts of sensitive information, where it's required to do so, but you need to minimize that. As it says, you don't just want to be collecting, huge amounts of data about, people and storing that, because there's no need to have that data. If you're in a kind of, reported email scenario, somebody may report something which goes into a model. Maybe it's even a malicious email chain that's been hijacked, supply chain attack, whatever it might be. I mean, down there on that thread, there could be a whole bunch of personal sensitive information. The threat actor doesn't care about that, right? But ultimately, someone might see that, report that email, and now all of a sudden that email is going into, you know, forming part of a model with a whole bunch of, you know, of sensitive data that, you know, would not meet the regulations around data minimization, right? Because there's just a whole bunch of extra information on the email that wouldn't necessarily be there. It wasn't meant to be there, you know, whatever it is. But the point is that if a model takes hold of that, then ultimately it's going to get stored or processed in a way that might breach that regulation, right? So, and there's a whole other bunch of things, you know, we mentioned data localization, cross-border transfers, security breach, you know, risks, all that sort of stuff, even third-party vendor compliance, right? You know, vendor might have some software, but, you know, where is the hardware that's running on, right? And where does that sit, you know, geographically? You got to have an understanding of where that is, the data residency, as I say, the data transfer, the security of the data transfer. There's a whole series of different things that can essentially complicate the issue. And again, depending on the regulations, depending on the type of data, you know, can make it quite a complicated subject. So definitely something that you need to get a handle on if you're, you know, if you're utilizing those kinds of solutions.
Great. Thank you so much. The next question I have here is, beyond just detecting threats, how does integrating human oversight with AI technology help mitigate the data security risks that we're discussing? How does this approach empower an organization's internal security teams?
You want to take that, James?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, all right. So human oversight, right? It's sort of one of our tenets at Cofense is that we believe that there should be human oversight of AI systems. We do believe in AI, and we believe that it's going to move everybody forward at a much faster pace. But having a human in the loop is such a critical aspect of this, especially when it comes to these highly regulated environments. If you have someone who is aware of your business and the context of the emails that are coming in, that person can submit that email to an AI system, but they'll go in and they'll actually remove the sensitive information that is specific to their organization. That could include brands or internal code names, or even, you know, credentials if they happen to be in there. Having an analyst in front of an email to be able to understand exactly what needs to be redacted with the intelligence of the organization behind them will be a much better solution than just trusting blindly in a system to redact it and then remove it on. So human oversight will be a critical part of that, right? But human oversight also plays a critical role in model training, in our opinion, at least for one of our models. It's the human input that actually goes into training our AISF models. So what the human does with what they're seeing in front of them actually builds out the classification. So having a human there not only informs what choices to make and what to share with an AI system, but can also help to train the AI system. And when you have that human knowledge going into a model, it makes it much, much better, especially when you're scoping it directly to what the organization sees. Your profile of emails that come into your organization is very unique to your organization and your organization alone. You have certain threat actors that are going to be attacking just you because they're interested in you. So understanding from a security analyst perspective, what is relevant to your organization? What does an actual attack look like? What themes are the attackers using to try to get into our organization is important. And the models that are out there are generically trained. They're not trained on the specifics of your organization. They may not detect those specific themes. They may not understand that you know, one email is really a phishing email when it looks like a legitimate business email, because they don't have the context of your organization specifically. So having a human there, I think, makes a lot of sense. AI systems are going to get better and better and better, and maybe eventually we'll get to AGI and we'll have something that can actually do it for us. But in the meantime, and for the next foreseeable future, it's going to require some human intervention at some point to be able to understand, is the system actually working for me, and is it doing exactly what I want it to do? And if it's not, I need to adjust that and get it to go in the right direction. So that's why we think human oversight is a very critical feature for AI systems moving forward.
Yeah, no, and I come at this really from this kind of concept of, you know, putting humans in the mix means they play a supervisory role in the AI workflow, right? So when you combine the two things together, you're getting the benefit of the majority of the automated processing, right? Because you want the automation to kind of handle the bulk load of effort, and certainly where you're trying to do something at scale, it can really help you. But then you're also getting the accuracy of a human eye that's confirming the output, right, of the process. And so there's another kind of key part of this, which I think we did actually discuss a little bit on the previous webinar, which is, where in the process is the human doing the supervising, and, what is it that they're actually being given to oversee? And I think there's a lot of solutions that actually get this wrong, in the fact that they're leaving the AI to make the final it's bad or it's not bad decision, right? And then sort of passing to a human being for ratification, right? Or potentially to sort through something that it just couldn't understand. But the problem with that is that if the AI doesn't think it's bad, it never passes it to the human for the ratification. And so it gets through that gateway, right? You're relying on the AI to make the decision. And if it gets that wrong, the human being never sees it. They don't get to play the supervisory role that they would otherwise play in the process. So actually having the right process, even if you are deciding you want to have humans in that process, you can still get that wrong. And I think, some vendors are getting that wrong. Like the human is not in the right place in the process. So for instance, our processes work slightly different in the sense that we'll look at everything with the AI, look at stuff. And I think, and Jason, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but we'll tag things and provide confidence scores against, elements of the email, and then pass that to a human expert for a final decision, right? Whether that's, spam or whether it's malicious, right? So the idea is not to try and find the bad stuff and then have someone check it, because the AI might miss something, right? In our case, we just want to flag everything and make the analyst job as easy as possible, in the sense that most of the work is being done, and what the analyst is doing is putting a final rubber stamp on it. But ultimately, they are the gatekeeper as to the question of whether or not something is bad or not. And that, for my money, is a much more accurate method, a much more accurate process, and ensures that you're less likely to have something slip through that process and therefore remain a threat to users in their inboxes of the organization. So I think that's actually quite an important qualifier in the way that AI is working. And again, if you're dealing with AI, saying, well, we've got this AI solution, it's just going to take care of all this for you, you've really got to ask the questions about, well, how is it doing that? What is the process, right? What is the opportunity for something to slip through? Because in a lot of cases, there is a lot of stuff slipping through. And ultimately, that's why you still see, organizations who've invested in lots of these technology potentially still getting breached. So I think that's, a fairly specific distinction that is worth making.
Excellent. Thank you both so much. I think that's good for now. Thank you for those insights. And I think let's go ahead and kick off the Q&A portion.